My name is Claire Morgan, and the night my world cracked open began with a single sheet of paper. I was standing in the living room of our Atlanta home, the air thick and heavy, like a storm about to break, when my husband Ethan thrust a set of divorce papers into my hands. His lips curved into a smirk that chilled me more than any winter wind. "Sign them," he said, waving the documents like a victory flag. "I don't need you anymore. I've got $500 million coming my way. You were just convenient." For a second, I thought I misheard him. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the steady tick of the clock on the mantel. The words sliced through me. Not just the demand for divorce, not just the smugness in his tone, but the casual cruelty of it. $500 million. That was all my life. Our years together, our marriage meant to him. The room seemed to tilt. I reached for the sofa to steady myself, the leather cool under my fingers. My voice caught in my throat, but no words came out. I stared at Ethan's face, a face I thought I knew, but suddenly it was a stranger's. The man I shared coffee with each morning, the man who once whispered promises under the oak trees in Piedmont Park, was now telling me I had been nothing more than an ATM until he got his windfall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the papers back at him and shatter every glass in that room. But grief is a strange thing. It hardens you in ways you don't expect. Just days earlier, his father, my father-in-law, had passed away, a man who treated me with kindness, who asked about my work, who believed in me when Ethan never did. I was still raw mourning the man who had shown me more family than my own husband ever had. And Ethan, he wasn't mourning, he was celebrating. Celebrating money, celebrating freedom from me, celebrating the end of everything I thought was real. The silence stretched so long that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My hands trembled as I held the papers, but inside something shifted. A whisper in my mind, maybe it was my father-in-law's voice, maybe it was my own cut through the chaos. "Stay steady, Claire." I drew a breath slow and deliberate. "Fine," I said, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. I scrawled my name across the bottom line, each stroke of the pen steadier than the last. "You want this, file it yourself, and when you're done, send me my things." I dropped the papers back into his stunned hands and turned toward the door. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, echoing louder with each step. Past the living room, past the photos of vacations where I thought we were happy, past the life I thought we were building together. When I pushed open the front door, the humid Georgia night wrapped around me like a curtain. The cicadas buzzed in the oak trees lining the yard, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger for all the lies, relief for finally seeing the truth. Ethan thought he had won. He thought the money made him untouchable, that casting me aside was the final move in some cruel game. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that the very fortune he was banking on was nothing more than a mirage. I walked down the steps without looking back, the papers no longer in my hand, the weight of them gone. My life with Ethan ended in that moment, but my story was only beginning. And deep inside, beneath the hurt and betrayal, a spark ignited, a spark of defiance, a spark of freedom. Because sometimes the end isn't a collapse, it's the start of something stronger. The morning after I walked out of that house, Atlanta felt different. The oak-lined streets I used to drive every day looked foreign, like I had been dropped into someone else's life. I kept hearing Ethan's words echoing in my head, $500 million. Over and over again, like a curse. But what cut deeper wasn't the number. It was the way he used his father's death like a ticket to freedom. The same man who used to sit with us on the back porch, sipping iced tea and telling stories about building shopping centers across Georgia was barely gone a week. And Ethan was already celebrating. He didn't just betray me, he betrayed his father too. I pulled my car over near Piedmont Park and sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The betrayal was a storm inside me, rage, grief, disbelief. I thought of the last conversation I had with my father-in-law. He had looked me in the eye and said, "Claire, you've got a good head on your shoulders. Don't let my boy drag you down." At the time, I brushed it off. Now those words felt like prophecy. I wanted to scream at Ethan to demand how he could discard me so easily, but I knew the answer. To him, love was a transaction. My savings, my support, my stability, those were the things he wanted. Once he believed he had a fortune secured, I was just baggage. The city bustled around me, joggers, people walking their dogs, kids chasing soccer balls on the grass, but I felt like I was sealed in glass invisible. My chest ached with something worse than heartbreak. It was humiliation. How could I not see this coming? The late nights out, the excuses, the way he dodged responsibility. Little signs I ignored because I thought marriage meant holding on. But the image of him waving those divorce papers, bragging about money that wasn't even in his hands yet, burned away the shame. It replaced it with clarity. He had shown me exactly who he was, and once someone does that, you either stay blind or you open your eyes for good. I drove away from the park, my hands steadier now. The skyline rose in the distance, sharp and cold against the humid summer sky. I whispered to myself, "You're free." It didn't feel real yet, but saying it out loud gave me strength. Still, freedom is a lonely word when you have no place to land. My clothes, my photos, my life were still inside that house. But I couldn't go back. Not then. Not when every corner of that home was soaked with his lies. I checked into a small hotel downtown. The room was nothing fancy, cream-colored walls, a stiff mattress, the faint smell of bleach, but it was mine. No smirk waiting at the door. No husband measuring my worth against dollar signs. Just me and the silence. That night, as I stared out the window at the traffic crawling along Peachtree Street, I made myself a promise. I would not be the woman begging to stay. I would not be the woman who lets a man define her value by the size of a bank account. And if you've ever felt discarded, if someone has ever looked you in the eyes and made you feel small, then you know what that vow means. Before I go on, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Share it in the comments. I read every story, and I know there are people out there who need to hear yours too. And if this journey speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe, because the road ahead is only getting more intense. I lay back on the stiff hotel pillow, the neon glow from a billboard outside painting streaks across the ceiling. Ethan thought he had won. He thought money made him untouchable. But deep down, I knew something he didn't. That fortune he counted on was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. He would learn soon enough. And when he did, the same arrogance he used to push me out of his life would be the very thing that left him begging at my door. The next evening, I stood in front of the hotel mirror staring at my own reflection. The divorce papers were already signed. Ethan probably thought he was the victor, walking around that mansion, with his chest puffed out, bragging to anyone who would listen that his life was about to begin. But what he didn't realize was that mine had already started. I could still see the smug look on his face when he handed me those papers. That smirk. It was the smirk of a man who believed he had all the power, all the cards. For years I had watched him shrug off responsibility, ignore bills, laugh off promises. Now he thought fortune had finally tipped in his favor. But he had no idea that he had just handed me back my freedom. I didn't cry, not then. The tears had already run dry. What I felt was something harder, sharper, like steel forming under heat. And as I packed a small overnight bag, folding my clothes with deliberate care, I realized something important. Ethan thought money was the only kind of wealth worth having. But he was wrong. There is strength in survival. There is wealth in resilience. The following morning, I drove past our old house. The manicured lawn glistened under the Georgia sun sprinklers, spraying in neat arcs across the grass. From the outside, nothing had changed, but inside everything was poisoned. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I thought back to how fast it had all unraveled. One minute we were planning a dinner with his father, and the next he was gone. His father's chair sat empty, but his lessons still echoed in my ears. "Claire," he used to say, "never let anyone write your story for you." At the time I thought he meant my career. Now I understood he was talking about life itself. Later that day, as I sat in a cafe sipping bitter coffee, I saw Ethan's name flash across my phone. For a split second, I considered answering. But then I remembered his words. "You were just convenient." My thumb hovered over the screen, and then I let the call go to voicemail. There was power in silence. Sometimes not answering is louder than any scream. I looked around at the people in the cafe, students hunched over laptops, a couple laughing at some private joke, an older man reading the paper. And I realized something: everyone here had their own battles. And mine was just one of many. But it was mine to fight, mine to tell, mine to own. That night, I called my best friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. I told her everything: the papers, the inheritance claim, The way he had treated me like a placeholder until his so-called fortune came through. There was a pause on the line, and then she said the words I needed to hear. Claire, he didn't win. You did. You got out before the wreck hit. Her words stayed with me. They were a reminder that leaving isn't failure. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do, and maybe you felt that too. Maybe you've stood in a room where someone told you that you weren't enough, that you were disposable. If you have, then you know what it means to keep walking, even when your legs shake. I returned to the hotel that night and placed the signed divorce papers on the desk. For Ethan, they were proof of victory. For me, they were proof of survival. I crawled into bed, pulled the thin blanket up to my chin, and whispered into the dark, "This is not the end." Because endings aren't always final. Sometimes they're the first step toward freedom. Grief has a strange way of revisiting you when you least expect it. As I sat on the edge of that hotel bed, staring at the city lights bleeding across the window, my mind drifted back to a different life. A different love. Before Ethan, there had been Daniel, my first husband, my anchor, my safe place. Daniel wasn't wealthy. He wasn't flashy. He was a construction foreman with calloused hands and a smile that could soften the hardest day. We lived simply. We were saving for a small house on the outskirts of Atlanta, a place where we dreamed of planting a garden and maybe raising a family. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Then one morning the phone rang. I still remember the way the voice on the other end trembled. There had been an accident at the job site, a scaffolding collapse. Daniel didn't make it. The days after blurred into a fog of funeral arrangements, casseroles from well-meaning neighbors, and the cold emptiness of a bed that suddenly felt far too big. I woke up each morning hoping it had all been a nightmare, but the silence of our apartment told me otherwise. When the insurance company called weeks later, I almost hung up. They said I was entitled to $500,000 in life insurance and severance. I didn't want it. How could I take money for a life that had been priceless? But Daniel's parents, kind souls, in their late 70s, insisted I keep it. He would want you to start over, his mother whispered, pressing my hand. That money felt like blood money. I deposited it into the bank, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it for months. It just sat there, a painful reminder that I had lost everything that mattered. People assumed I was lucky to have it, but luck doesn't taste like ash in your mouth. I tried to share part of it with Daniel's brother and his wife. They accepted only a small portion, shaking their heads at the rest. You'll need it more than we do, they said. Their generosity cut me deeper than I expected, because it showed me what real family looked like. For a while I threw myself into work. Sales pitches, client meetings, long hours at the office that left me drained but numb. At home, though, the silence was unbearable. I'd pour 2 cups of coffee out of habit only to stare at the untouched mug across the table. I was surrounded by reminders of the life I had lost. And then came Ethan. He wasn't like Daniel. Where Daniel was steady, Ethan was charming. Where Daniel was grounded, Ethan was restless. I should have seen the cracks then. But I was vulnerable. I was lonely. And when someone makes you laugh after months of tears, it feels like oxygen. He told me I was strong. He told me I deserved to be happy again. And in the beginning, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Because when you're drowning, you'll cling to anything that looks like a lifeline. Looking back now, I see it clearly. Ethan wasn't a lifeline. He was an anchor tied to greed, dragging me down without me realizing it. But at that time, I couldn't see it. I only saw a chance to escape the grief that had consumed me for so long. That's the thing about loss, it leaves cracks in your heart. And if you're not careful, the wrong person can slip right through them. Sometimes when I think about Daniel, I wonder if he would be proud of me now. Proud that I found the strength to walk away from Ethan before he could destroy me completely. And maybe, just maybe, proud that I never let money define who I was. Because wealth isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in resilience. Loneliness is a hunger that sneaks up on you. After Daniel's death, the apartment I lived in felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Each evening, I would unlock the doorstep inside and be swallowed by silence. I'd toss my purse on the chair, kick off my shoes, and pause, half expecting to hear his voice asking how my day went. But there was nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of my own footsteps. That emptiness gnawed at me. I tried to fill it with work. I pushed myself harder at the sales firm, showing up early, leaving late, taking on clients no one else wanted. On the surface, I was a model employee, but beneath that polished exterior, I was unraveling. Nights were the worst. I'd make 2 cups of coffee out of habit, stare at the untouched mug, and feel the ache of loss all over again. It was during one of those hollow seasons that Ethan appeared. He wasn't part of my circle. He was a sales rep for a partner company, someone I ran into at industry mixers and client dinners. At first, he was just another face in the room, charming quick with a joke, the kind of man who seemed to light up conversations without much effort. But one afternoon at a conference in Charlotte, something shifted. We ended up at the same coffee stand, both reaching for the last blueberry muffin. He laughed, made some offhand joke about destiny and pastries, and for the first time in months, I found myself laughing too. Real laughter, the kind that comes from deep inside, not the polite kind you fake to end a conversation. Later that day, during a quiet moment between sessions, I let the dam break. I told him about Daniel, about the accident, about the nights that felt endless. I braced myself for the awkward silence that usually followed such confessions. But Ethan didn't look away. He listened. He even cracked a small, gentle joke, something about how bad he was at dating, how he usually got dumped faster than a cold cup of coffee. It wasn't cruel, just light enough to make me breathe again. That was how it started. We began meeting after work, first in groups, then just the two of us. Drinks at a midtown bar, walks along the Beltline, long talks about childhood's dreams, disappointments. He painted himself as the underdog, the son of a wealthy real estate developer, who always felt like he fell short. He told me his mother had left when he was young, chasing luxury his father wouldn't bankroll. There was a sadness in his story, a kind of wounded pride, that made me want to believe he was different from the man who raised him. And maybe that's why I let my guard down. I saw him not just as a man, but as someone broken too. Someone who could understand the hollowness I carried. He made me feel alive in moments when grief had left me numb. That was intoxicating. Looking back, I know it wasn't love at first sight. It was desperation disguised as connection. But in those moments, it felt real. It felt necessary. And if you've ever lost someone, you know what I mean. When grief carves you hollow, the first hand that reaches for you feels like salvation, even if it isn't. And let me ask you this. Have you ever been in that place where someone made you laugh when you thought you'd never laugh again? Share it in the comments, because your story might be the reminder someone else needs tonight. That was Ethan's power. He stepped into my grief with a grin, a joke, a charm that made me believe maybe life could be light again. I didn't see the cracks yet. I didn't see the selfishness lurking under the surface. All I saw was a man who made me feel less alone. And when you're standing in the ruins of your life, sometimes that's all it takes to let someone in. It did not take long before Ethan's charm turned into something more tangible. One evening we sat across from each other at a little barbecue joint in Decatur, the smell of smoked brisket thick in the air. I was halfway through my pulled pork sandwich when he put down his glass, leaned forward and said, "Claire, why don't we just get married? We're not getting any younger." At first I laughed, assuming it was another one of his impulsive jokes. But his eyes didn't waver. They burned with that restless confidence of his, the kind that made you think he was always one step ahead of life itself. My fork paused midway, and my chest tightened. Trauer. Say. We had been dating barely a year. My best friend had warned me to take things slow, that grief could cloud judgment. But Ethan's words landed with a strange force. Maybe it was the way he said it, like a dare. Like he believed in us more than I believed in myself. I wanted to resist. I wanted to say, let's wait. But the loneliness inside me argued louder. Maybe a leap was exactly what I needed. So with a nervous laugh and my heart pounding in my throat, I said yes. That night, as we walked back to the car under the glow of streetlights, he dropped another truth like a casual aside. "By the way, I'm living with my dad," he said. I stopped in my tracks. "You're what?" He shrugged as if it were nothing. "He's been sick. Needs help. You'll see when you meet him. It's no big deal." But it was a big deal. He had never told me this before. Not once during all those late-night conversations or walks along the Beltline. My stomach churned with unease. Why hide it? Why now? Still, I convinced myself it was just his way of protecting me from too much too soon. I agreed to meet his father, hoping it wouldn't change things. The day we drove up to his father's house, I felt like I was stepping into another world. It was a 3-story red brick home shaded by oaks older than the city itself. The lawn was wide, but practical, the kind of place that whispered old money without flashing it. I tightened my grip on Ethan's hand nerves, buzzing like static. Inside the house smelled faintly of cedar and old books. His father sat in a recliner, frail but dignified. His eyes, sharp with intelligence, lit up when he saw me. "So this is Claire," he said, his voice warm despite the strain in it. "I've heard about you." We talked for nearly an hour, not about shallow things, but about my work, the tech industry, where markets were heading. He asked real questions, listened carefully, and offered insights that showed the sharpness of a mind that had once built empires. I was shocked. For the first time in months, I felt seen, not as a widow, not as Ethan's partner, but as myself. When we left that evening, I glanced back at the house, humbled and strangely comforted. His father had welcomed me without reservation. But Ethan muttered under his breath, "Dad's stingy. Could have built a mansion, but settled for this." I frowned. The house was bigger than anything I had ever lived in, filled with history and care. How could Ethan call that stingy? But I let it slide, brushing away the unease. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment I should have paid closer attention. The cracks were already there, the jealousy, the entitlement, the bitterness toward the very man who had given him everything. But when you're standing at the edge of a new life, sometimes you choose not to see the warning signs. You tell yourself love can bridge the gaps, that people will rise to the occasion. So I ignored the voice in my head, the one whispering caution, and I said yes again, not just to marriage, but to moving into that house. And that decision would shape everything that came next. The first few weeks in that house almost fooled me. Ethan played the part of the devoted son and husband. He cooked simple dinners, spaghetti one night, burgers the next, and made a show of vacuuming the carpet, while his father and I watched from the living room. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this was his turning point. Maybe responsibility had finally found him. But reality seeped through quickly, and it was his father who opened my eyes. One evening after Ethan had forgotten to take the trash out for the third time, his father called me into his study. The room smelled of leather and pipe tobacco, lined with photographs of ribbon cuttings and community centers. He looked at me with tired eyes. "Claire," he said quietly, "I thought marriage might straighten him out. But he's always been careless. I'm sorry you have to bear it." His apology stunned me. Here was a man in his late 70s, frail and battling health issues, apologizing for his son's behavior. And instead of being angry, I felt a pang of loyalty toward him. This man had built a fortune, yes, but more than that, he had built legacies, parks, libraries, schools. He believed in giving back. And he treated me not as an outsider, but as part of his family. I remember one afternoon sitting on the back porch with him, the Georgia heat pressing heavy in the air. He leaned on his cane and pointed to the creaky boards under our feet. "Needs replacing," he said with a wink. "I'll see to it." Within weeks, the entire porch was rebuilt, complete with a ramp for his wheelchair. He joked, "Makes it easier for me, and you get to enjoy it too." That was the kind of man he was, practical generosity. He spent where it mattered. He invested in people, not vanity. Ethan, however, saw it differently. One night he slammed a beer bottle on the counter and spat. "Why does Dad spend money on you? I ask for a new TV, he says no. But you get a whole porch." I tried to explain that it wasn't about me. It was about accessibility, about his father's needs. But Ethan wouldn't hear it. His jealousy was a wildfire spreading through every corner of our marriage. And yet his father never stopped believing in me. He'd pull me aside with his raspy voice, reminding me, "You've got a good head on your shoulders. Don't let my boy drag you down." Those words sank deeper each time he said them, like armor being fitted piece by piece around my heart. It's a strange thing finding parental love in a place you didn't expect. My own parents were long gone, and for years I had carried that ache quietly. But here in that red brick house, I found it in the most unlikely person, my father-in-law. He asked about my career, encouraged my ambitions, reminded me that my worth had nothing to do with Ethan's temper or his petty complaints. And if you've ever had someone believe in you when you barely believed in yourself, you know how powerful that can be. It changes you. It gives you a strength you didn't know you had. Meanwhile, Ethan drifted further. At first, he claimed he had quit his sales job to take care of Dad full-time. But I watched as he spent more hours sprawled on the couch scrolling his phone while a hired caregiver handled the real work. His father saw it too. Sometimes, I'd catch the old man's eyes lingering on Ethan, a shadow of disappointment etched into his face. But he never scolded Ethan outright. Instead, he spoke to me, quietly, trustingly, passing me not just advice but responsibility. And without realizing it, I had become his confidant, his ally, his partner in facing the end of his life. Looking back, I see the irony. Ethan thought he was the one inheriting a fortune. But the real inheritance, the lessons, the trust, the belief was already being handed down. And it wasn't to him. It was to me. The cracks in Ethan's mask widened quickly. One afternoon, I came home to find a gleaming vintage Mustang parked in the driveway. Its chrome sparkled in the sun, polished within an inch of its life. My pulse spiked as I stepped inside and found Ethan in the living room, grinning as he unwrapped a brand new set of golf clubs. "Whose car is that?" I asked, my voice already sharp. He didn't even glance up. "Mine," he said, casual, as if announcing he had bought a sandwich. My jaw dropped. "With what money?" He waved a hand, smirking. "Relax. You got your fancy bathroom renovation thanks to Dad. I deserve something too." My stomach churned. That bathroom wasn't my idea. It had been his father's. He overheard me complain about a leaky faucet and took it upon himself to remodel, installing a walk-in shower to help with his mobility. It was practical, necessary. But Ethan twisted, it turned generosity into favoritism, and used it to justify draining my savings. That night, I checked my bank account. Nearly $50,000 gone. The car, the clubs, designer clothes still in shopping bags in our bedroom. He had treated my money like a toy box to plunder. The confrontation that followed burned into my memory. I slammed the bank statement on the table. "You cannot just take my savings, Ethan." He leaned back in his chair, smirk fixed in place. "What's the big deal? Dad's loaded. Once he's gone, we'll be set. Might as well enjoy life now." The chill that ran through me in that moment was worse than any betrayal before. He wasn't just careless. He was calculating, counting down the days until his father's death as if it were a jackpot waiting to fall in his lap. From then on, the house felt poisoned. I would come home after 10-hour days selling software, negotiating with clients who demanded miracles for pennies, only to find Ethan surrounded by takeout containers, the television blaring while the caregiver handled his father's needs. The man, who had promised to be a homemaker, had become nothing more than a parasite. One evening I snapped. "What does being a homemaker mean to you?" I demanded, pointing to the sink piled with dishes. He rolled his eyes. "Relax, Claire. I've got Dad covered. You're always so uptight." Uptight. That was the word he used while burning through my savings, while ignoring his father's declining health, while I carried the weight of our lives on my shoulders. I checked my statements again, another 10,000 drained, this time on a high-end watch. My voice shook with fury as I confronted him. "You are spending my money like it's nothing. This stops tonight." He shrugged, unmoved. "Dad listens to you, fixes up the house for you. Why can't I have a little fun? His money's coming to us soon enough." The word "us" felt like poison. I realized he didn't see his father as a person anymore. He saw him as a bank account waiting to empty into his pockets. That night I took back my bank card and locked him out of my accounts. He didn't even flinch, whatever he muttered sinking deeper into the couch. "You'll see, I'm going to be set." His confidence made my skin crawl. He was living in a fantasy, and the cost of that fantasy was my hard work, my stability, my sanity. But I couldn't walk away yet. Not when his father, frail but still kind, looked at me with eyes full of trust. He didn't deserve to be left alone with a son who saw him as nothing more than a paycheck. So I stayed, for him. And each time I looked at Ethan sprawled and smug, I whispered to myself, there will be a reckoning. Because greed always eats itself alive. The tension in that house grew thicker by the day. It was like living with a storm cloud, always heavy, always ready to break. Ethan no longer bothered to hide his spending. I'd find packages stacked at the door, drones, leather jackets, gadgets he barely touched before discarding. My savings had been cut off from him, but he still burned through what little money he had left, convinced a river of gold was just around the corner. His father saw it too. One evening I found him in his study staring at old photographs. He sighed and shook his head. "Claire, he's always been like this. His mother was the same, money slipped through her hands like water. I tried to teach him value, but it never stuck." His voice broke slightly. "I just wanted him to be better than this. I wanted to promise him things would change. But deep down I knew Ethan wasn't going to change. Not for me. Not even for the man who had given him everything. And the spending wasn't the only thing. Ethan's contempt for me deepened. Fueled by jealousy he never admitted outright. He saw every gesture from his father toward me as favoritism. If his father rebuilt the porch with a ramp, Ethan pouted for weeks. If his father bought me a small gift, like a book he thought I'd enjoy, Ethan erupted in accusations. One night his anger boiled over. He slammed a beer bottle onto the counter glass, shattering his face red with rage. "Why is Dad spending money on you? Why do you get the porch, the bathroom, the attention? I'm his son, Claire." I stared at him, heart pounding. Because he sees what matters. And maybe, just maybe, he doesn't trust you anymore. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the yelling. He stared at me like I was a stranger, then stormed out of the room. I could feel my resolve hardening. The weight of his father's trust pressed on me heavier each day. He began to involve me in matters Ethan had no patience for: conversations about his properties, his accounts, his plans for the future. I spent hours by his side, sorting through paperwork, listening to him explain the projects he once poured his fortune into. And that's when the truth revealed itself. The $500 million Ethan bragged about it wasn't a treasure chest waiting for him. It was collateral. His father had used it to fund a massive community project, a dream that failed before it could take root. If the debt wasn't repaid, the bank would claim every last cent. I remember gripping the edge of the desk, my throat dry. Ethan had no idea. He was building his empire of arrogance on quicksand, and when the ground finally gave way, he would fall hard. I wanted to tell him to throw the truth in his face, but I kept quiet. Because some lessons cannot be taught, they have to be lived. That night I lay awake listening to the soft creaks of the house, my mind racing. Ethan thought he was weeks away from a fortune, but really he was weeks away from ruin. And if you've ever been in that moment when you know something devastating that the other person doesn't, you understand the weight of silence. And this is where I have to tell you something important. The worst was still coming. What Ethan did next, it made everything before look like child's play. Stay with me because you will not believe what happened. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness. Hold on, Claire. Just hold on. Because the storm was closer than ever and I needed every ounce of strength to survive it. The day his father passed away, the entire house seemed to sigh. It was sudden, a heart attack that came quietly, without warning. One moment, he was telling me about the community center he had once built in East Atlanta, eyes glowing with pride, and the next he was gone. Just like that. The silence afterward was crushing. The study once filled with his raspy voice and the rustle of papers sat hollow. The porch he rebuilt creaked under my feet as I stood alone staring into the yard he loved so much. He had been more than a father-in-law to me. He was a mentor, a friend, someone who saw me for who I was when no one else did. My grief was sharp and raw, a wound that felt impossible to heal. But Ethan, he walked into that grief with a smile. I will never forget it. His father's body had barely been taken from the house, and Ethan was already rifling through drawers searching for account statements. His eyes gleamed like a gambler spotting a winning hand. That night he found me sitting at the kitchen table clutching a photo of his father cutting a ribbon at a community park. Ethan dropped a stack of papers in front of me. "Claire, we need to talk," he said, voice brimming with excitement. I looked up, half hoping for a rare moment of vulnerability. Instead, I saw greed. Pure, unfiltered greed. "I checked Dad's account," he said. $500 million. We're set for life. And now, I don't need you anymore. He slid a fresh set of divorce papers across the table, his grin wide. The words hit like a slap. My chest tightened, air rushing out of me. I had expected insensitivity, but not this. Not the blatant way he tossed aside everything we had built, everything I had sacrificed, as if I were just an expense he could cut now that his payday had arrived. "You married me to coast until this, didn't you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. He didn't even flinch. "Of course I did. You were the ATM until the real money came in." In that instant, every kindness I had ever given him, every sacrifice I had made, turned to ash. I thought of the late nights I worked to keep us afloat, the dinners I cooked while he lazed on the couch, the money he bled from my accounts. And now with his father, not even buried yet, he was discarding me like trash. My hands clenched into fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. I wanted to scream, to hurl every truth I knew about the $500 million that wasn't really his. But something inside me whispered, "Hold steady, stay calm." So I did. I drew in a slow breath, met his eyes, and said, "Give me the papers." He smirked, convinced he had broken me. I signed my name across the bottom without hesitation, slid them back across the table, and stood. File them yourself, and when you're done, send my things. Then I walked out, past the walls that had once held laughter, past the rooms where I had built a life that was never real, past the man who believed he had won. The night air wrapped around me thick and humid, but I felt lighter than I had in months. He thought his empire was secured. He thought his freedom was sealed, but I knew something he didn't. That fortune he was celebrating, it was nothing but a mirage. And soon he would discover just how cruel illusions can be. So, I drove away, my pulse pounding, a laugh bubbling in my chest. It wasn't joy, it wasn't madness, it was something sharper, the thrill of knowing the tables were about to turn. Because greed always blinds, and Ethan's blindness was about to cost him everything. I checked into a modest hotel downtown, the kind with beige curtains and a faint smell of bleach lingering in the hallways. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I shut a door behind me and felt peace instead of dread. Ethan thought he had cast me out with nothing, but he had unknowingly handed me something priceless: freedom. I sat on the stiff mattress, staring at the city lights blinking through the window. The papers were signed, the marriage was over. But instead of despair, I felt a strange calm settle inside me. Because I held a truth, Ethan didn't know a truth sharp enough to slice through his arrogance. I remembered the nights I spent with his father in the study, sorting through files and bank statements. He had trusted me with the reality Ethan never bothered to learn. That fabled $500 million wasn't a pile of gold waiting to be claimed, it was collateral. Money tied up in a community project that had collapsed years ago. Money that the bank now held in its grip. His father had looked me in the eyes and said, "Claire, if I don't make it, the money goes with me. Ryan," he always called Ethan by his first name, "isn't ready for the truth. But you'll know what to do." At the time, his words broke my heart. Now they felt like a shield. I spent the next few days walking the streets of Atlanta, trying to picture my life without the chains of Ethan's greed. I browsed condos, scribbled notes about neighborhoods, and even allowed myself to imagine decorating a space that was mine alone. Each step felt lighter, each dream closer. But I knew the storm was coming. Ethan's fantasy couldn't last forever. The moment he tried to touch that money, the illusion would shatter, and when it did, he would come looking for me. Sure enough, 3 days later, my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. I answered with a calm, steady voice. On the other end, chaos exploded. "Claire, what the hell did you do?" he shouted so loudly I had to pull the phone from my ear. His words tumbled over each other, frantic, desperate. I went to the bank. I tried to pull from Dad's account, and they said it's locked. They said it's collateral, $500 million locked. What's happening? I let him rant, waited until his panic began to choke him. Then I spoke slowly. "You didn't know, did you?" There was silence, followed by a stammer. "Know what?" "Your father used that money to fund his last project," I said. "It failed. He borrowed against it. Every cent is gone to settle debts. The only thing left is $75,000. That's your inheritance." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could almost hear the weight of reality crashing down on him. 75,000, his voice cracked. "That can't be. That's nothing. I spent more than that last month." Exactly. For the first time in years, I felt a grim satisfaction. The arrogance, the smugness, the way he waved those papers in my face, it all dissolved into pathetic desperation. He had bet his life on a fantasy, and now he was bankrupt. I leaned back on the stiff hotel pillow, eyes closed. This is what happens when you treat people like numbers, Ethan. You never cared about your father. You never cared about me. You only cared about money, and now it's gone. I could hear him begging on the other end, pleading for me to take him back, to share my savings, to rescue him from the mess he had created. But his words rolled off me like rain on glass. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in courtrooms or revenge plots. Sometimes it comes in silence, in letting a person drown in the very greed they worshipped. And Ethan was already sinking. His voice over the phone was a broken thing. Gone was the arrogant man who had sneered at me across the kitchen table, waving divorce papers like a prize. What I heard now was desperation. "Claire, please," he stammered. "We can fix this. We can forget the divorce. You've still got your savings, your job. I've got nothing. I'm 43, unemployed, and there's barely enough left for rent. Don't leave me like this." For a moment I closed my eyes and let the sound of his pleading wash over me. Once those words might have pulled me back. Once I might have felt pity, even love, but not anymore. All I saw was a man who had chosen greed over loyalty, fantasy over truth. I stayed silent long enough for him to choke on his own panic. Then I said evenly, "You made your choice when you treated me like an ATM. You made your choice when you celebrated your father's death like it was a payday. Don't ask me to carry the weight of your mistakes now." The line went quiet except for his ragged breathing. I ended the call. That night, I lay in the hotel bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that had led me here. Daniel's accident, the lonely nights, Ethan's grin as he promised forever only to trade it for numbers in a bank account. I had been blind, but not anymore. Strangely, I didn't feel hollow. I felt lighter, stronger, because I finally understood something his father had tried to teach both of us. Wealth without integrity is nothing but dust. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at the hotel front desk with Ethan's handwriting scrawled across it. Inside was a check for $35,000, half of what was left from his father's account. No note, no apology, just the money. Maybe he thought sending it would buy him leverage. Maybe he thought it would soften me. But all it did was remind me of how far he had fallen. I deposited the check into my own account, not to spend, but to keep as a marker. A reminder that illusions always collapse, and that the man who once bragged about being set for life was now scraping by. Through friends, I heard the rest of the story. Ethan went back to sales, but the fire was gone. He stumbled, made mistakes, and quit after a month, humiliated by bosses half his age. Eventually, he picked up part-time delivery work, his pride shrinking with each paycheck. The man who thought $500 million would crown him king was now just another ghost in traffic driving meals to strangers' doors. And maybe you're wondering, did I feel sorry for him? The truth is no. Sympathy is wasted on those who spit on love and loyalty. What I felt was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only when you've walked through fire and survived. If you've ever been discarded, if you've ever had someone tell you that you're replaceable, listen to me now, you are not. Your value isn't measured in bank accounts or inheritances. It's measured in resilience, in courage, in your ability to keep going when the world tries to break you. And before I tell you how my story truly ended, I want to hear from you. Have you ever watched someone destroy themselves with their own greed? Leave it in the comments, because your words might be the reminder another person needs right now. I folded the deposit slip from the bank and tucked it into my wallet beside a photo of his father. His eyes in that picture still carried the same warmth, the same belief in me. I knew then that the greatest inheritance I had ever received wasn't money. It was the lesson he left behind. And that lesson was about to guide me into the next chapter of my life. The condo I eventually found wasn't extravagant. It was a one-bedroom unit in Midtown with a narrow balcony that overlooked the Atlanta skyline. But when I stepped inside for the first time, sunlight streaming across hardwood floors, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't space or luxury I needed. It was ownership, control, a place that was mine and mine alone. I remember standing by the balcony that first night, watching the city hum below me. Cars crawled through traffic, neon signs flickered, and the summer air pressed against my skin. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. I felt present, whole. The $35,000 Ethan had sent me sat untouched in my account. I treated it like a relic, a reminder of his father's faith in me. Every time I logged in and saw the number, I thought of the man who rebuilt the porch, not for show, but for utility. Who poured millions into a community center that never turned a profit because it was meant to give kids a safe place to grow. That money symbolized him, not Ethan. And I decided to keep it as a kind of tribute, a promise that his legacy would live through the choices I made. But freedom has its shadows. There were nights when the silence in my condo felt heavy, when loneliness crept back into my chest. Old habits tried to return, making 2 cups of coffee, reaching for a hand that wasn't there. I reminded myself those ghosts were temporary. They would fade, replaced by new routines, new laughter. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling. Through friends, I learned he was bouncing from job to job, unable to hold down even the simplest roles. His arrogance had once been fueled by the promise of fortune. Without it, he was just another man adrift. People whispered about his temper, his drinking, his bitterness. The kingdom he imagined had dissolved into smoke, and he had no one left to blame but himself. And I'll admit there were moments I pictured him in his car late at night, hands gripping the wheel, wondering how it all went so wrong. A part of me wanted to gloat, to send a message reminding him of every cruel word he had thrown my way. But I never did. Because true victory isn't rubbing salt in wounds. It's walking away and never needing to look back. One Saturday morning, I took a walk through Piedmont Park. The same park where Ethan had once whispered promises under the oak trees now became my place of renewal. I sat on a bench, journal in hand, and wrote down every lesson the last few years had carved into me. Love is not about convenience. Money will never buy loyalty. Freedom is worth more than fortune. As I wrote, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, but it wasn't defining me anymore. It was shaping me. And maybe you felt that too. Maybe you've stood in the ruins of a life you thought was secure, only to realize it was built on sand. If you have, then, you know what it means to stand back up, dust yourself off, and start again. And I'll say, this don't go anywhere. Because the final twist in my story, the moment where everything came full circle, is something you do not want to miss. I closed my journal, stood, and walked through the park with my head high. The skyline stretched ahead like a promise, and for the first time I believed it. The past was behind me. The future was mine to write. And this time I would write it on my own terms. It was a humid evening when the final thread snapped. I was in my condo, the balcony door open to let in the faint breeze when my phone rang. Ethan's name flashed across the screen. For a moment I almost didn't answer, but curiosity tugged at me. I wanted to hear the sound of his downfall with my own ears. His voice was nothing like the smug tone he once used. It was cracked, desperate, trembling. Claire, please. I can't do this. I thought I was going to be rich. I thought Dad left me a fortune. But all I have is $75,000, and it's gone. I spent it already. I don't know what to do. I closed my eyes, letting his words hang there. There was a time when I would have rushed to comfort him, when his weakness would have triggered my instinct to rescue, but not anymore. You made your choices, Ethan, I said softly. You treated people like stepping stones. You treated love like a loan you could repay when the money came in. Now you have to live with that. He sniffled. You don't understand. I can't survive like this. I don't know how to work hard like you. I'm lost. The irony made me laugh bitterly. He was admitting the truth I had always known. He had never learned resilience. His father tried to teach him, and I had tried too. But Ethan only ever learned greed. Then learn now, I replied, my voice sharp but steady. Because no one is coming to save you. Not your father, not me, not the money. It's gone. And the only person left is you. Silence stretched across the line. For a moment I thought he had hung up. Then quietly he whispered, I'm scared. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. Afterward, word trickled through mutual friends. He had tried going back to sales, but his confidence was shattered. He fumbled presentations, missed deadlines, and walked out before he was fired. Soon after, he picked up part-time work as a delivery driver. The man who once bragged about $500 million was now scraping together tips, driving meals across the city at midnight. And I didn't feel sorry for him, not even a little. Because this wasn't tragedy, it was justice. A man who worshipped wealth had been abandoned by it. A man who mocked love had been left alone. Meanwhile, my life was no longer defined by him. I poured myself into my job, closing deals, earning respect on my own terms. I decorated my condo with small touches, plants by the window books, stacked by the bed, a photo of his father on my desk as a reminder of what real legacy looked like. Sometimes as I watered the plants on my balcony, I would think back to the woman I had been, the one who signed divorce papers, with shaking hands, convinced she was losing everything. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, you are not losing. You are being set free. And if you've ever been left behind, if you've ever had someone reduce you to nothing more than convenience, hear me now. Their rejection does not define your worth. Their greed does not erase your resilience. Sometimes what feels like abandonment is actually liberation. Because here's the truth, when greed burns itself to ashes, freedom rises from the flames. And in my story, that freedom was mine. Stay with me, the ending is not just about walking away, it's about building something better. I set the phone down that night and looked out at the city lights. Ethan was lost in his own shadow, but I was stepping into something new. And the best part, he would never see it coming. The months that followed were the truest test of who I was becoming. Alone in that midtown condo, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, brewed 1 cup of coffee instead of 2, and stood by the balcony to watch the city stir awake. The skyline no longer felt like a wall trapping me. It felt like an invitation, an open horizon urging me forward. I poured my focus into work. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Clients respected me, colleagues sought my advice. Deals that once slipped through my fingers began to land solidly in my lap because I carried myself differently, stronger, clearer. I no longer needed validation from a man who measured worth in dollars. I had my own. The $35,000 Ethan begrudgingly sent me remained untouched, sitting quietly in my savings account. Each time I checked my balance, it wasn't the money I saw, it was his father's face. The man who believed in me, who treated me as family, who reminded me I had value independent of Ethan's weakness. That check was a symbol not of Ethan's downfall, but of his father's quiet trust. Meanwhile, Ethan faded. Friends whispered about him working delivery routes late into the night, his pride reduced to grumbling over cheap tips. He was a ghost in the city, now slipping in and out of traffic, while the empire he imagined collapsed before it ever existed. He had lost everything, but not because of bad luck. He lost because he never valued anything beyond greed. And here's the lesson his downfall carved into me. True freedom is not in what you inherit, but in what you choose. Ethan inherited $75,000 and squandered it in weeks. I inherited $35,000, and I chose to keep it as a reminder of strength. Same resources, different outcomes, because character makes all the difference. Sometimes I would walk through Piedmont Park and watch families gather under the oaks. I'd see fathers lifting children onto their shoulders, mothers laughing, friends spreading blankets on the grass. And I would think, this is wealth. This is legacy, not numbers in an account, not paper promises of fortune, but the connections you nurture and the resilience you leave behind. One Sunday, as I journaled on a park bench, I wrote the words that summed up everything I had lived: greed destroys, integrity endures, freedom heals. That was the message I wanted to carry, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever felt discarded, betrayed, or reduced to nothing by someone else's ambition. And maybe you listening right now have lived something similar. Maybe you've been betrayed by someone who promised forever, but cashed out early. If you know this, your story does not end there. That wound, as deep as it feels, can become the very fire that refines you. And if this story speaks to you, if it stirs something inside, then don't walk away silently. Subscribe, because every story I share is a battle cry for freedom. Like this video, leave your thoughts below and keep walking with me. Because the next chapter, the one waiting after betrayal, is where life truly begins. I closed my journal, breathed deeply, and let the Atlanta air fill my lungs. My life was no longer chained to Ethan's greed or his illusions. I was free. And freedom, I realized, is the greatest fortune of all. Freedom doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips in quietly, like sunlight, through a half-drawn curtain. That's how it felt in the months after I left Ethan behind. The noise of betrayal, the sting of humiliation, the weight of grief, all of it softened with time, until what remained was clarity. I learned to enjoy the simplest rituals, brewing coffee for one, watering the plants on my balcony, reading in the stillness of my condo while the hum of the city pulsed beyond the glass. These weren't grand gestures, but they were mine. Every small act reminded me that I was no longer living under someone else's shadow. I carried his father's memory with me too. That $35,000 in my savings wasn't wealth, it was a compass. Each time I glanced at it, I remembered the porch. He rebuilt the words he spoke, the belief he placed in me. He had wanted his son to learn those lessons. Instead, they became mine to live out. Ethan faded into the background, a man who had gambled everything on greed, left with nothing but regret. But I didn't need to follow his story anymore. My life was no longer tied to his downfall. My life was about rebuilding, choosing, moving forward. If you've ever walked through betrayal, know this. The ending of one story doesn't mean you are broken. It means you are being rewritten. Pain can be the soil where resilience grows, and freedom is the flower that blooms. So keep walking, keep building, keep choosing yourself. Because sometimes the greatest fortune we inherit is not money or property, but the strength to begin again.